Sometimes the most precious things in life are the ones others have forgotten. 8-year-old Tala knew this feeling well as she stared at the old wooden wagon, sitting abandoned outside Murphy's antique shop. With her dog Ringo beside her, something about this forgotten wagon called to her heart. She spent her last dollar from selling lemonade to buy it, thinking it would make a perfect clubhouse. But when she started fixing it up, something magical began to happen. Old songs came to her in dreams, and the elders in her community started visiting, sharing stories they hadn't told in years. This little wagon was about to bring an entire community together in ways no one expected. But what ancient secret was this wagon hiding, and how would it transform an entire community? Before we discover that mystery, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert town of Red Mesa stretched across the horizon, like a painting left unfinished, where modern conveniences sat uncomfortably beside ancient traditions. Tala Silvercloud had grown up in this place where two worlds touched, but rarely spoke to each other. Her small adobe house sat on Coyote Ridge, painted the color of sunset sand, with wind chimes her grandmother had made from polished stones hanging from the porch eaves. Every morning, Tala woke to the sound of those chimes singing in the desert. Wind, and every morning her grandmother Nayeli would be sitting in her favorite chair on the porch, fingers working with dried herbs from her worn leather medicine pouch. The pouch itself was a thing of beauty and mystery, soft deerskin darkened with age, decorated with intricate beadwork that told stories Tala was only beginning to understand. "Come here, little star," Nayeli would call, using the name that meant light in their language. "Help your grandmother sort these healing plants." Tala would settle beside her grandmother, breathing in the sage and sweetgrass, listening to stories that seemed to float on the morning air like prayers. Nayeli's hands moved with practiced certainty, separating leaves and stems, while her voice carried tales of the old days, when their people moved freely across the vast desert, when the land itself was their pharmacy and library. But those stories felt distant to Tala, like echoes from another lifetime. During the school day, she sat in classrooms where Apache history was reduced to a single chapter in textbooks written by outsiders. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, meant well, but when she spoke about Native Americans, she used the past tense, as if Tala and the other Apache children were remnants of something that had already ended. The disconnect followed Tala everywhere. At lunch, she ate traditional fry bread her mother packed, while her classmates had store-bought sandwiches. After school, she walked past satellite dishes and cell towers on her way to help her grandmother gather plants that most people in town considered weeds. Her parents, David and Maria Silvercloud, worked hard to provide for their family. Her father as a mechanic in town, her mother as a nurse at the local clinic, but they spoke less and less of the old ways with each passing year. "Times change, Mija," her mother would say, when Tala asked why they didn't participate in the traditional ceremonies anymore. "We have to live in the world as it is now." Yet Tala felt something pulling at her heart, something that whispered of deeper truths and older wisdom. This feeling grew stronger whenever she walked through downtown Red Mesa with her loyal companion Ringo. The mixed-breed dog had appeared in their yard 3 years ago, as if he'd been waiting specifically for her. Ringo was unusual. Sometimes he seemed to understand not just her words, but her thoughts, and he had an uncanny ability to lead her to interesting discoveries. Together, they would explore the dusty streets of town, past the modern grocery store and the old trading post, past the new houses with their pristine lawns that looked strange against the desert landscape. But Tala's favorite destination was Murphy's Curiosities, an antique shop that seemed to exist in its own pocket of time. The shop occupied a building that had once been a general store back when Red Mesa was a frontier town. Its weathered wooden sign creaked in the wind, and the windows were so filled with treasures that barely any light could penetrate inside. Jeremiah Murphy, the owner, was a man in his 70s with kind eyes and hands permanently stained from handling old objects. He had moved to Red Mesa from back east, drawn by what he called the spirit of the place. Every old thing has a story. Murphy often told Tala when she visited. Most folks just don't know how to listen anymore. His shop was a wonderland of forgotten treasures. Vintage postcards, old photographs of cowboys and Native Americans, hand-carved furniture, pottery, jewelry, and tools whose purposes had been lost to time. Murphy never minded when Tala spent hours browsing, running her fingers over objects that seemed to hum with memory. Ringo would follow her through the narrow aisles, his nose twitching at scents that lingered from decades past. It was during one of these visits, on a particularly warm afternoon in late spring, that Tala first noticed the wagon. She had been examining a collection of old silver bracelets when something outside the shop window caught her eye. There, sitting among a display of larger items on Murphy's front porch, was a wooden wagon, unlike anything she had ever seen. The wagon wasn't large, about the size that might have once been pulled by a single horse or mule. Its wooden sides were painted a faded blue that reminded Tala of the sky just before dawn. What struck her most was how carefully it had been crafted. The woodwork showed the kind of attention to detail that spoke of love and patience. Iron fittings held the boards together, and painted designs decorated the sides, symbols that looked almost familiar, like something she might have seen in her grandmother's drawings. Attached to the front of the wagon was a small silver bell, tarnished with age, but still beautiful. Even from inside the shop, Tala could see how the bell caught and scattered the afternoon light. There was something about the whole scene that made her chest feel tight with unnamed longing. "Mr. Murphy," she called, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "How long has that wagon been there?" Murphy looked up from the ledger he was writing in, following her gaze to the window. His expression grew thoughtful, almost puzzled. "Funny thing about that wagon," he said slowly. "I could swear it wasn't there yesterday, but my memory's not what it used to be. Must have been in the back storage area for months." Tala pressed her face to the window, studying every detail of the wagon. Ringo had moved to stand beside her, his ears alert and his tail wagging in a way that suggested he was as intrigued as she was. The longer she looked, the stronger her feeling became that this wagon was meant for something special. "Could I take a closer look at it?" she asked. Murphy nodded, reaching for his keys. "Sure thing, child, but be careful. Some of these old things can be fragile." Outside, the wagon looked even more remarkable. The wood was solid despite its age, and the painted designs were clearly the work of someone with artistic skill. Tala knelt beside one of the wheels and traced a pattern with her finger, a spiral design that matched something she had seen in her grandmother's medicine pouch. The silver bell hung from a leather cord that had been braided in a traditional style she recognized. As she ran her hand along the wagon's side, Tala felt the strangest sensation, almost like a whisper in her mind, or the echo of laughter from long ago. The feeling was so vivid that she turned around, expecting to see someone behind her. But there was only Ringo, sitting perfectly still and watching her with his intelligent brown eyes. "How much would something like this cost?" Tala asked, though she already knew the answer would be more than she had. Murphy stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Well now, that's a good question. I'm not even sure how it ended up out here. Tell you what, I can see you've taken a real shine to it. What were you thinking of offering?" Tala's heart raced. She had been saving money from her lemonade stand all summer, planning to buy something special, but not knowing what. In her pocket was the crumpled dollar bill she had earned the day before, selling cups of lemonade to neighbors and passers-by. It was all the money she had in the world. "I have $1, she said quietly, embarrassed by how little it was. To her surprise, Murphy didn't laugh or shake his head. Instead, he studied her face with the same careful attention he gave to his antiques. $1, he repeated softly. "You know, there's something about this wagon. Something that tells me it's been waiting for the right person to claim it. He was quiet for a long moment, looking between Tala and the wagon. Finally, he nodded. $1 it is. But I have one condition. You have to promise me you'll take good care of it. This wagon has stories in it, important ones. I can feel it. Tala's hands shook as she pulled the crumpled bill from her pocket. The transaction felt momentous, as if she were crossing a bridge into unknown territory. As Murphy took her dollar and helped her figure out how to transport the wagon home, she noticed that the silver bell had begun to move slightly in the still air, producing the faintest ring. Walking home with the wagon proved to be an adventure. In itself, it was heavier than it looked, and the wheels, though they turned, clearly hadn't been used in years. Her father was working late at the garage, and her mother was pulling a double shift at the clinic, so Tala had to navigate the 6 blocks to her house on her own. Ringo seemed to understand the importance of the mission. He walked alongside the wagon, occasionally helping push when it got stuck on uneven pavement. Neighbors stopped to stare at the unusual sight of a small Apache girl pulling a vintage wagon down the street, but Tala barely noticed their attention. She was too focused on the growing sensation that she had just made the most important purchase of her life. By the time she reached home, the sun was setting, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Tala positioned the wagon in the backyard, under the old cottonwood tree where she often played. As she stepped back to admire her acquisition, the silver bell chimed once, clearly and sweetly, though there was no wind to move it. That night, as Tala lay in bed with Ringo curled at her feet, she felt more excited than she had in months. Tomorrow, she would begin fixing up the wagon, turning it into the clubhouse she had always dreamed of having. She had no way of knowing that her simple purchase would soon awaken something that had been sleeping in her community for far too long, or that the wagon's true purpose was far greater than anything her 8-year-old imagination could conceive. In her dreams that night, she heard the distant sound of singing, voices raised in harmony, words in a language that sounded familiar, though she didn't understand them. When she woke the next morning to the sound of her grandmother's wind chimes, she could still remember fragments of the melody, humming along without realizing she was doing so. The wagon sat waiting in the backyard, patient and mysterious, its silver bell silent in the dawn stillness. But Tala could have sworn that as she looked out her bedroom window, she saw the painted designs on its sides shimmer slightly in the early morning light, as if they were awakening too. The decision to spend her last dollar on the wagon had not been impulsive, though it might have appeared that way to anyone watching. Tala had been running her lemonade stand every weekend for 3 months, carefully saving each crumpled bill and handful of coins in an old mason jar hidden beneath her bed. The work was harder than most people realized, squeezing fresh lemons until her small hands ached, mixing the perfect ratio of sweet to tart, sitting for hours in the desert heat, waiting for customers who sometimes never came. But Tala had learned patience from her grandmother, who often said that the best things in life required you to wait for the right moment. As she stood outside Murphy's Curiosities that warm afternoon, dollar bill clutched in her sweaty palm, she knew this was her moment. Murphy had seemed reluctant to discuss the wagon's price when she first asked. He kept walking around it, running, his weathered hands along its wooden sides, occasionally pausing to examine the painted designs more closely. The silver bell seemed to fascinate him particularly. He touched it gently, setting it to ringing with a clear, pure note that hung in the air longer than seemed physically possible. "You know," Murphy said finally, "I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've never encountered anything quite like this wagon. Look at this craftsmanship. See how these joints fit together. This wasn't built by some factory worker. This was made by someone who understood wood, who respected it." Tala nodded eagerly, though she was more interested in the painted symbols than the construction techniques. The designs seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them, becoming clearer and more detailed the longer she observed. One pattern in particular drew her attention, a series of interconnected spirals that reminded her of water flowing over stones or wind moving through tall grass. "The paintwork is remarkable too," Murphy continued. "These pigments have held their color despite decades of weather, and these symbols, they're not decorative. They mean something important." As if responding to his words, the silver bell chimed softly, though there was no breeze to move it. Both Murphy and Tala looked at the bell in surprise, then at each other. "Did you hear that?" Tala whispered. Murphy's eyes had grown wide. "Child, I think this wagon has been waiting for you specifically. I've never seen anything like it react this way to someone's presence." When Tala finally worked up the courage to make her offer, her single precious dollar, Murphy's initial response was silence. He studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to read something written there in invisible ink. Ringo, who had been sitting quietly beside Tala, suddenly stood and walked over to the wagon. The dog began sniffing around the wheels, his tail wagging with increasing excitement. "Even your dog knows there's something special here," Murphy observed. "Animals are better than people at sensing these things." The negotiation, if it could be called that, lasted only a few more minutes. Murphy seemed less interested in the money than in Tala's promise to care for the wagon properly. "This isn't just a toy," he warned her solemnly. "I can feel it in my bones. This wagon has work to do. Important work. You'll understand what I mean soon enough." As Tala handed over her dollar bill, the silver bell rang again, this time with such clarity and resonance that several passers-by stopped to look around for the source of the sound. Murphy accepted the money with ceremony, folding the crumpled bill carefully and placing it in his shirt pocket. "Consider this wagon yours now," he said. "But remember, some possessions end up possessing their owners. Take care that you and this wagon remain partners, not master and servant." The journey home proved to be more challenging than Tala had anticipated. The wagon was heavier than it looked, and its wheels, though they turned freely, clearly hadn't been used for their intended purpose in many years. The uneven sidewalks of Red Mesa presented constant obstacles, requiring Tala to pull hard while Ringo pushed from behind with his shoulder. Neighbors came out of their houses to watch the unusual procession. Mrs. Gonzalez, who lived 2 blocks from Murphy's shop, called out from her front porch. "¿Qué tienes ahí, niña? What do you have there, child?" "It's my new wagon," Tala called back, pausing to catch her breath. "I'm gonna fix it up." Old Mr. Santiago, who was watering his desert garden, shook his head with amusement. "That thing looks like it's been through some adventures. You sure it's worth the trouble?" But Tala was certain. With each block they traveled, her conviction grew stronger that she had made the right choice. The wagon seemed to become lighter as they progressed, as if it too was eager to reach its destination. Several times, when they encountered particularly challenging terrain, Tala could have sworn she felt the wagon helping to propel itself forward. The most remarkable moment of the journey occurred as they passed the small park where her grandmother sometimes went to collect herbs. An elderly Apache man named Floyd Bigay was sitting on one of the benches, feeding breadcrumbs to the sparrows. As the wagon rolled past, Floyd stood up abruptly, his eyes fixed on the painted designs. "Stop!" he called out, his voice carrying an urgency that made Tala halt immediately. "Let me look at that wagon." Floyd approached slowly, his weathered face showing a mixture of recognition and disbelief. He examined the painted symbols with the intensity of someone reading an important letter. When his fingers touched the same spiral pattern that had fascinated Tala, his eyes filled with tears. "Where did you find this?" he asked quietly. "Murphy's shop," Tala replied, suddenly uncertain whether she should have bought the wagon after all. "Is something wrong with it?" Floyd shook his head slowly. "Nothing wrong, child. Quite the opposite. This wagon, I remember stories about a wagon like this from when I was your age. My grandfather used to tell tales about a medicine woman who traveled from settlement to settlement, carrying healing and wisdom in a blue wagon with a silver bell." As if summoned by his words, the bell chimed again, more softly this time, like a whisper or a sigh. But those were just stories. Floyd continued, more to himself than to Tala. Old legends that probably grew in the telling. He looked at Tala with new interest. What's your name, child? Tala Silvercloud. Floyd's eyebrows rose. Silvercloud. Your grandmother is Nayeli Silvercloud. Yes, sir. Well then, Floyd said with a smile that seemed to hold secrets. I think this wagon has found exactly where it needs to be. You give my regards to your grandmother, Tala, and you take very good care of that wagon. It's more precious than you know. The rest of the walk home passed in a blur of excitement and anticipation. When Tala finally reached her backyard and positioned the wagon under the old cottonwood tree, she felt as though she had just completed the first chapter of a much longer story. Her parents weren't home yet. Her father was working late at the garage, and her mother had picked up an extra shift at the clinic. This gave Tala time to really examine her purchase in private. She walked around the wagon slowly, taking in details she had missed at Murphy's shop. The painted designs were even more intricate than she had realized, with layers of symbols that seemed to tell a complex narrative. The silver bell was particularly beautiful up close. It hung from a braided leather cord that showed signs of age, but no wear, as if it had been carefully preserved. When Tala touched the bell gently, it produced a note that seemed to resonate not just in her ears, but in her chest, as if the sound was awakening something that had been sleeping inside her. Ringo had claimed a spot beside the wagon and seemed determined not to leave it. The dog's behavior had been unusual all day, more focused and purposeful than his normal playful self. Now he sat like a guardian, alert to every sound and movement around the wagon. As the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Tala made a decision. Tomorrow she would begin the wagon's restoration. She would clean away the dust and grime, repair any damage she could manage, and turn it into the most wonderful clubhouse any child had ever owned. She had no way of knowing that the moment she had handed Murphy her crumpled dollar bill, she had set in motion events that would transform not just her own life, but the entire fabric of her community. The wagon had indeed been waiting, just as Murphy had suggested, waiting for someone with the right combination of curiosity, determination, and heritage to unlock the memories it carried. That night, as Tala drifted off to sleep with the wagon, visible from her bedroom window, the silver bell rang once more in the still desert air. The sound carried farther than it should have, reaching the ears of people throughout Red Mesa who had long forgotten they were listening for something they couldn't quite name. The next morning arrived with the promise of adventure. Tala woke before dawn, eager to begin working on her wagon, but her grandmother's wind chimes were already singing in the pre-dawn breeze, which meant Nayeli was awake and waiting on the porch with her morning tea and healing plants. "Come sit with me, little star," her grandmother called as Tala headed toward the backyard. "The wagon will wait. Your spirit needs tending first." Tala settled beside her grandmother, though her eyes kept drifting toward the cottonwood tree where her wagon sat in the growing light. In the early morning sunshine, the painted designs seemed more vivid than they had the day before, as if the desert air was somehow reviving the old pigments. Nayeli followed her granddaughter's gaze and grew very still. For a long moment she said nothing, just stared at the wagon with an expression Tala had never seen before, part recognition, part wonder, part something that might have been fear. "Grandmother?" Tala asked softly. "Is everything all right?" "That wagon," Nayeli said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you find it?" Tala told the story of her purchase, watching her grandmother's face grow more troubled with each detail. When she mentioned Floyd Begay's reaction, Nayeli's weathered hands began to tremble slightly. Did Mr. Begay say anything else about the medicine woman? Just that it was an old story his grandfather used to tell. Tala studied her grandmother's face carefully. "Do you know something about it?" Nayeli was quiet for so long that Tala began to worry she wouldn't answer. Finally, the elderly woman reached for her medicine pouch and held it in both hands, as if drawing strength from its familiar weight. "There are some stories that are too important to tell casually," Nayeli said finally. And there are some objects that carry the spirits of those who made them. That wagon, if it is what I think it might be, has been waiting a very long time to return home." Before Tala could ask what that meant, her father emerged from the house, coffee mug in hand, ready for another day at the garage. David Silvercloud was a practical man who believed in fixing things that were broken and replacing things that couldn't be repaired. When he saw the wagon in his backyard, his first response was concern. "Mija, where did this come from?" he asked, walking over to examine it more closely. "And please tell me you didn't spend your lemonade money on something that's falling apart." "It's not falling apart, Papa," Tala protested, joining him beside the wagon. "Look at how solid it is." David ran his mechanic's hands over the wooden sides, testing joints and checking the stability of the wheels. To his surprise, the craftsmanship was exceptional. The wood had been carefully selected and properly cured. The joints were tight, despite their age, and the metalwork showed the kind of attention to detail he rarely saw in modern construction. "I have to admit," he said grudgingly, "whoever built this knew what they were doing. These wheels are hand-carved. Look at these symbols. I've never seen anything like them." Tala knelt beside one of the wheels, tracing the intricate patterns with her finger. The symbols were indeed remarkable, carved deep into the wood and filled with what looked like different colored paints or stains. The designs were complex, featuring spirals, geometric patterns, and what might have been stylized animals or plants. "They look like the patterns on Grandmother's medicine pouch," Tala observed. David glanced toward the porch, where his mother sat watching them. "Mama, come look at this. Have you ever seen symbols like these?" Nayeli approached slowly, leaning heavily on her walking stick. When she saw the wheel carvings up close, she gasped and had to steady herself against the wagon's side. "These are not just decorations," she said, her voice filled with awe. "These are sacred symbols. Each one tells part of a story. This wheel shows the cycle of seasons. This pattern represents the 4 directions. And this," she pointed to a particularly intricate design. "This is the symbol for Memory Keeper." "Memory Keeper?" Tala asked. "Someone chosen to hold the stories and traditions of the people," Nayeli explained. "Someone who ensures that important knowledge is not lost." David looked between his daughter and his mother, clearly uncomfortable with the mystical turn the conversation had taken. "It's a beautiful piece of craftsmanship," he said diplomatically, "but let's focus on practical matters. Tala, if you're going to keep this wagon, we need to make sure it's safe. Some of this wood might be rotted, and we should check for splinters or loose parts." For the rest of the morning, the 3 generations worked together to assess the wagon's condition. What they discovered was remarkable. Despite its obvious age, the wagon was structurally sound. The wood showed little signs of rot. The wheels rolled smoothly, and even the painted designs remained vibrant once they wiped away decades of dust. Hidden beneath the main bed of the wagon, Tala discovered a small compartment that had been cleverly concealed behind a removable panel. Inside were several items wrapped in what looked like pieces of traditional blankets. The fabric was faded but intact, and when Nayeli unwrapped the first bundle, she revealed a collection of carved wooden toys, small animals, and figures that had been crafted with the same attention to detail as the wagon itself. "These are old," Nayeli said, handling the toys with reverence. "Very old, and made by someone with great skill and patience." The second bundle contained what appeared to be tools, not the kind used for wagon repair, but implements that might have been used for ceremony or traditional crafts. There were carved wooden bowls, decorated with symbols that matched those on the wheels, and several items made from polished stone. David found the practical solution to Tala's restoration project by bringing home supplies from the garage. Gentle cleaners, soft cloths, and wood polish that would protect the painted designs without damaging them. But as they worked together that afternoon, he began to notice things that his rational mind couldn't easily explain. The silver bell, for instance, seemed to ring at significant moments when they uncovered a particularly beautiful symbol, when Tala successfully cleaned a section of painted design, or when Nayeli shared a fragment of traditional knowledge. There was never any wind strong enough to move the bell, yet it chimed with perfect timing. Even more puzzling was the way Ringo had appointed himself guardian of the restoration project. The dog positioned himself beside the wagon and refused to leave, even for his afternoon walk. He seemed to sense when they were about to uncover something important, growing alert and focused in the moments before each discovery. By late afternoon, when the restoration work had revealed most of the wagon's painted designs in their full glory, neighbors began to notice what was happening in the Silver Cloud backyard. Mrs. Chen, who lived next door, came over to investigate the activity. "What a beautiful piece," she said, admiring the wagon's transformation. "It reminds me of the painted furniture my grandmother had in China, pieces that told stories through their decorations." As Mrs. Chen spoke, the silver bell chimed softly, as if acknowledging the connection she had made between traditions separated by continents, but united by the human need to preserve memory through art. Word of the wagon's restoration spread through the neighborhood with surprising speed. By evening, several people had stopped by to see what Tala was working on. Each visitor seemed drawn to different aspects of the wagon. Some admired the craftsmanship, others were fascinated by the painted symbols, and a few, particularly the older residents, grew quiet and thoughtful when they saw it, as if the wagon triggered memories they couldn't quite reach. That night, as Tala lay in bed exhausted but satisfied with the day's progress, she realized that her simple desire for a clubhouse had evolved into something much more significant. The wagon was becoming a focal point for attention and interest she hadn't expected. Through her bedroom window, she could see the wagon clearly in the moonlight. The painted designs seemed to glow softly, and the silver bell hung perfectly still in the calm night air. But just as she was drifting off to sleep, Tala could have sworn she heard the faintest sound of singing, voices harmonizing in a language she didn't recognize, but somehow understood in her heart. The dreams began on the third night after Tala brought the wagon home. At first, they were fragments, glimpses of people in traditional dress, the sound of drums echoing across desert landscapes, and always, always, the silver bell ringing in harmony with voices raised in song. Tala would wake with melodies on her lips, humming tunes she was certain she had never heard before. Her grandmother noticed the change immediately. During their morning ritual on the porch, Nayeli would pause in her work with the healing plants to listen as Tala unconsciously hummed these mysterious songs. The elderly woman's expression grew more troubled each day, as if she recognized the melodies but couldn't place where she had heard them. "Little star," Nayeli said on the fourth morning, "these songs you've been humming, where did you learn them?" Tala looked up from the wagon, where she had been carefully cleaning the last of the painted panels. "I don't know, grandmother. They just come to me, mostly when I'm working on the wagon." "Sing one for me," Nayeli requested, setting down her medicine pouch. Tala felt suddenly self-conscious, but she began to hum one of the melodies that had been strongest in her dreams. As the notes filled the morning air, Nayeli's eyes widened with recognition and something that might have been fear. "Stop," the old woman said sharply, then immediately softened her tone. "I'm sorry, child. It's just that song is very old, very sacred. I haven't heard it in 40 years. What does it mean?" Nayeli was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands working nervously with the leather cord of her medicine pouch. "It's a calling song," she said finally. "A song used to gather the community when important stories need to be told. My grandmother taught it to me when I was about your age, but I haven't sung it since—" She stopped abruptly. "Since when?" "Grandmother, since the government schools told us we weren't allowed to sing the old songs anymore." That afternoon, while continuing her restoration work, Tala made another discovery that deepened the mystery. Hidden in a crevice where two boards met, She found several small pieces of fabric that had somehow remained protected from the elements. When she carefully extracted them, she realized they were fragments of traditional Apache blankets, pieces of weaving so fine and detailed that they took her breath away. The patterns were intricate beyond anything Tala had ever seen, featuring designs that seemed to move and shift when she looked at them from different angles. The colors, despite their age, remained vivid: deep reds, brilliant yellows, earth browns, and a blue that matched the wagon's painted sides perfectly. When her grandmother saw the blanket fragments, she nearly dropped her walking stick. "This weaving," Nayeli whispered, taking one of the pieces with trembling hands. "I know this work. My great-aunt Clara was famous for weaving like this. She could make patterns that seemed to tell stories just by looking at them." "Your great-aunt? She disappeared when I was very young," Nayeli said, her voice distant with memory. "The family said she went to live with relatives in another state, but..." She examined the weaving more closely. "These patterns, they're not just decorative. They're a form of writing, a way of recording stories and important information. Clara was teaching me to read the patterns before she left." As if summoned by their conversation about the weaving, an elderly Apache man appeared at their gate. Marcus Stone was a familiar figure in Red Mesa, known for his wood-carving skills and his habit of taking long walks throughout the neighborhood. But today he seemed different, more purposeful, as if he had come specifically to see them. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Marcus said politely, "but I've been hearing about the Wagon project, and I wondered if I might take a look." Tala eagerly showed him their progress. Marcus examined the restoration work with the eye of someone who understood both craftsmanship and tradition. When he saw the painted symbols on the wheels, he grew very still. "These designs," he said slowly, "they're similar to patterns I used to carve when I was younger, before I forgot how." "Forgot? How?" Tala asked. Marcus looked confused for a moment, as if he had said something he hadn't intended. "I must have made toys like this once," he murmured, more to himself than to them, "but I can't remember when or for whom." From his jacket pocket, Marcus pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside were 3 hand-carved wooden toys: a horse, a bird, and a small figure of a person. The craftsmanship was exceptional, and the wood had been polished to a warm glow. "I found these in my workshop yesterday," Marcus said, sounding puzzled. "They were sitting on my workbench as if I had just finished making them, but I have no memory of carving them. The strange thing is, they seem to belong with this wagon." As if to confirm his words, Marcus placed the toys in the wagon's bed, and they fit perfectly among the other carved items Tala had discovered. The wood was the same type, the carving style identical, even the polish matched exactly. "It's as if I made them specifically for this wagon," Marcus continued. "But that's impossible. I've never seen this wagon before in my life." He paused, studying the painted designs more closely. "Yet somehow, I know exactly where each of these toys should go." Nayeli watched this exchange with growing unease. "Marcus, how long have you been having these memory gaps?" "Just since yesterday," he admitted. "Ever since I heard that bell ringing in the night. I woke up with the strangest feeling that I was supposed to be making something, but I couldn't remember what." The silver bell, hanging motionless in the still afternoon air, suddenly chimed once, clear and resonant. All 3 adults looked at it in surprise, while Tala felt a familiar thrill of recognition. The wagon was awakening something in people, calling forth memories and skills they thought they had lost. Over the following days, the pattern repeated with increasing frequency. Neighbors would stop by ostensibly to see how the restoration was progressing, but each visitor seemed to be drawn by something deeper than mere curiosity. Mrs. Spotted Horse brought a collection of beaded items she claimed to have found in her attic, though she couldn't remember putting them there. Young Jimmy Crow Dog arrived with a drum he had apparently made overnight, though he had no recollection of learning how to craft traditional instruments. The most remarkable visit came from Elena Windwalker, an Apache woman in her 60s who worked as a librarian in town. Elena had always been known as someone who had embraced the modern world completely, rarely speaking about tribal traditions and certainly never participating in cultural activities. Yet she appeared at Tala's gate one afternoon, carrying a leather bundle that clearly contained something precious. "I need to show you something," Elena said without preamble. "Ever since I heard about your wagon, I've been having the strangest dreams. Last night I dreamed about my grandmother who died when I was 7. In the dream, she told me to look in the old cedar chest in my basement." Elena unwrapped her bundle to reveal a collection of items that took everyone's breath away. There were pieces of traditional jewelry, silver and turquoise work of museum quality, along with several ceremonial items whose purposes were unclear but whose importance was unmistakable. "My grandmother was a medicine woman," Elena said, her voice filled with wonder. "I had forgotten that completely until last night. After my parents died, I was raised by relatives who thought it was better to forget the old ways. But these items, they were hidden away, waiting." As Elena spoke, Tala noticed that Ringo had become increasingly alert. The dog had positioned himself as close to the wagon as possible and was watching each visitor with intense focus, as if he understood something important about what was happening. The dreams continued to intensify for Tala as well. She began to see clearer images, ceremonies conducted around fires, women weaving by lamplight, children learning songs that carried stories from generation to generation. In many of these dreams, the blue wagon occupied a central place, serving as a focal point for community gatherings. Most remarkably, Tala began to understand fragments of Apache language that she had never formally learned. Words would come to her as she worked on the wagon, and when she asked her grandmother about their meanings, Nayeli would look startled. "Where did you learn that word?" the old woman would ask. "That's not a word we use anymore. That's from the old language from before." "Before what, grandmother?" But Nayeli would always change the subject, returning to her herb sorting or finding some other task that required her attention. The transformation in the neighborhood was becoming impossible to ignore. People who had lived as strangers for years were stopping to talk with each other, sharing stories and memories that seemed to emerge from nowhere. The wagon had become an unofficial community center, drawing visitors throughout the day. Tala's parents were growing increasingly concerned about the attention their backyard was receiving. Her mother, Maria, worried about the disruption to their quiet family life, while her father remained skeptical about the mystical aspects of what was happening. "It's just a wagon," David would say whenever the conversation turned too far toward the supernatural, a beautiful, well-made wagon that's bringing out people's interest in history and craftsmanship. There's nothing magical about it. But even David couldn't explain why his own dreams had begun to feature images of traditional Apache metalwork, or why he had suddenly developed an urge to learn more about his cultural heritage. He found himself making excuses to spend time near the wagon, ostensibly helping with repairs, but actually studying the painted designs and carved symbols with growing fascination. The evening of the 7th day after the wagon's arrival, something extraordinary happened. As the sun set and the family gathered for dinner, they could hear singing coming from the direction of the wagon. Not the imagined melodies of Tala's dreams, but actual voices, several people humming in harmony. When they looked outside, they discovered that a small group had spontaneously formed around the wagon. Marcus Stone was there with his carved toys. Elena Windwalker had brought her grandmother's ceremonial items, and several other neighbors had gathered with objects they claimed to have remembered or found. The singing grew stronger as more voices joined in, creating a sound that seemed to fill the entire neighborhood with warmth and connection. Tala recognized some of the melodies from her dreams, and without conscious thought, she began to sing along. As her voice joined the others, the silver bell began to ring, not the single chimes they had grown accustomed to, but a sustained, musical ringing that harmonized perfectly with the human voices. The sound carried across Red Mesa, reaching the ears of people who had almost forgotten what it meant to be called home. Within 2 weeks of the wagon's arrival in Tala's backyard, what had begun as a child's restoration project had transformed into something neither she nor her family could have imagined. The blue wagon had become the unofficial heart of Red Mesa's Apache community, drawing people from across town who came ostensibly to admire the craftsmanship, but stayed to share memories and stories they thought they had forgotten. The most remarkable change was the appearance of 7 smooth stones that seemed to have materialized overnight around the wagon's perimeter. Tala discovered them one morning when she came out to continue her work. Perfectly round river stones, each about the size of her palm, arranged in a precise circle with the wagon at the center. When she asked her family about them, no one claimed to have placed them there. They looked like council stones, her grandmother Nayeli observed, studying the arrangement with obvious recognition. In the old days, when important decisions needed to be made or stories needed to be told, the community would gather in a circle marked by stones like these. "But who put them there?" Tala asked. Nayeli smiled mysteriously. "Perhaps the same. Someone who guided you to find this wagon in the first place." The stones seemed to formalize what had already been happening naturally. Each afternoon, as word of the wagon spread through the community, small groups would gather around it. Children from Tala's school began stopping by after class, initially curious about the restored wagon, but quickly becoming fascinated by the stories the adult visitors shared. Marcus Stone had become a regular presence, bringing new carved toys. Each day, always claiming he had found them in his workshop but couldn't remember making them. His collection now included an entire menagerie of wooden animals, each piece crafted with the same exceptional skill and attention to detail. When arranged in the wagon, they seemed to tell stories of their own. Elena Windwalker had begun bringing books from the library, volumes on Apache history and culture that she selected with an intuition that surprised even her. "I never paid attention to these sections before," she admitted to Tala, "but now I can't seem to stay away from them. It's as if the books are calling to me." The most significant development was the return of Floyd Begay, the elderly man who had recognized the wagon during Tala's journey home from Murphy's shop. Floyd had been visiting every few days, each time bringing a different story or piece of traditional knowledge. His presence seemed to anchor the gatherings, giving them a sense of continuity and authority. "This wagon," Floyd explained to the assembled group one afternoon, "reminds me of stories my grandfather told about a medicine woman named Clara Morning Star. She traveled between the scattered Apache settlements in a blue wagon, carrying not just healing herbs, but the stories and songs that kept our people connected." Tala felt a chill of recognition at the name. Clara Morning Star, was she related to anyone here? Floyd looked around the circle of faces, his gaze settling on Nayeli. "She was your great-aunt, wasn't she, Nayeli? The one who disappeared during the Troubles." Nayeli had been unusually quiet during these gatherings, participating but always seeming to hold something back. Now, faced with Floyd's direct question, she could no longer avoid the truth that everyone was beginning to sense. "Clara was my father's sister," Nayeli admitted quietly. "She was a medicine woman, yes, but more than that, she was a keeper of memories. She could weave stories into blankets, carve history into wood, paint prayers onto pottery. When the government schools began forcing children away from their families, Clara tried to preserve what she could." "What happened to her?" Elena asked. Gently, she disappeared one night, along with her wagon and everything she had collected. The family was told she had gone to live with relatives in Arizona, but Nayeli gestured toward the restored wagon. "I think she hid her treasures and waited for the right time, the right person to find them again." As if responding to this revelation, the silver bell chimed softly, and several people in the circle nodded, as if they had been expecting this confirmation. The gatherings began to take on a more structured form as the days passed. Children would arrive first, drawn by the wooden toys and the stories they seemed to tell. Then came the adults, some bringing items they had found or remembered, others simply coming to listen. Finally, the elders would arrive, and the real storytelling would begin. Floyd emerged as the natural leader of these sessions, his deep voice carrying tales that seemed to awaken memories in everyone who heard them. He spoke of the old days when the Apache people moved freely across the desert, following seasonal cycles and gathering in sacred places to share knowledge and celebrate life's passages. The wagon was more than transportation, Floyd explained one evening, as the group sat in the growing darkness, the painted designs seeming to glow in the lamplight. It was a traveling library, a mobile ceremony space, a connection between communities that might not see each other for months at a time. Tala found herself becoming the unofficial curator of the items people brought to the wagon. She carefully catalogued each carved toy, each piece of beadwork, each fragment of traditional clothing or ceremonial object. Her bedroom had become a storage area for artifacts that seemed to multiply daily, but not everyone in Red Mesa was pleased with the changes the wagon had brought. Some community members, particularly those who had worked hard to assimilate into mainstream American culture, viewed the renewed interest in traditional ways with suspicion or concern. Mrs. Patterson, whose house overlooked the Silver Cloud backyard, complained to Tala's parents about the noise and activity. "All this singing and carrying on," she said. "People will think we're all living in the past, instead of moving forward with the times." Similar concerns were raised at PTA meetings and town council sessions. Some residents worried that the emphasis on Apache traditions might make the community seem backward or unwelcoming to non-native residents. Others feared that children were being distracted from their schoolwork by old stories and superstitions. These tensions came to a head during a particularly powerful gathering 2 weeks after the stones appeared. Floyd had been telling the story of the winter when his grandfather's generation was forced to attend boarding school, forbidden to speak their native language or practice their traditions. As he spoke, several listeners began to weep, not just for the historical injustices he described, but for their own lost connections to that heritage. "We were taught to be ashamed," Floyd said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Taught that our ways were primitive, that our stories were just mythology, that our languages were barriers to success. Some of us believed those lies so completely that we forgot who we were." The silver bell rang throughout his speech, sometimes softly like a whisper, sometimes with clear, commanding tones that seemed to emphasize particular points. By the time Floyd finished, the entire circle was holding hands, united in shared grief and recognition, but the unity was fragile. Even as the wagon brought people together, it was also creating divisions between those who embraced its message and those who feared where it might lead. Tala, still only 8 years old, found herself at the center of conflicts she didn't fully understand, carrying responsibilities that sometimes felt too heavy for her small shoulders. Yet each morning, when she looked out her window at the wagon, sitting peacefully under the cottonwood tree, surrounded by its circle of stones, she felt a deep certainty that this was meant to be. Whatever challenges lay ahead, the wagon had work to do, and somehow she had been chosen to help it accomplish that work. The opposition to what was happening around the wagon began to organize itself with the same mysterious efficiency that had brought the supporters together. It started with worried phone calls between concerned parents, progressed to informal meetings at the community center, and eventually culminated in a petition that was circulated throughout Red Mesa. Tala first became aware of the organized resistance when her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, kept her after school one afternoon. The classroom felt different with all the other students gone, larger and somehow more formal, as if it had transformed from a place of learning into a courtroom. "Tala," Mrs. Rodriguez began carefully, "I've been hearing about the activities at your house. Some parents are concerned that you're spending too much time focused on the past instead of preparing for your future. But I'm learning so much, Tala protested. Mr. Begay has taught me more about our history in the past month than I learned in all my previous years at school. Mrs. Rodriguez sighed. I understand your enthusiasm, but education needs to be balanced. The stories and traditions are important, yes, but so is mathematics, science, and English. Some people worry that children are being distracted from the skills they'll need to succeed in the modern world. When Tala arrived home that afternoon, she found her parents in the middle of an intense discussion with several neighbors. The conversation stopped abruptly when she entered the room, but the tension was obvious. Her father looked particularly troubled, his face showing the strain of being pulled between competing loyalties. We need to talk, Mija, David said gently. Some people in the community are concerned about how much attention the wagon is attracting. They think maybe it's time to scale back the gatherings, at least until things settle down. But why? Tala asked, genuinely puzzled. Everyone seems so happy when they're here. People are remembering things they thought they had lost forever. Her mother, Maria, exchanged a meaningful look with David. It's complicated, sweetheart. Some people believe that dwelling too much on the past prevents us from moving forward. They worry that all this focus on traditional ways might make it harder for our children to fit into the broader community. That evening, as if sensing the growing tensions, the wagon revealed another of its secrets. While helping her grandmother sort through the latest collection of items that people had brought to share, Tala discovered a hidden compartment deeper than any she had found before. Inside, wrapped in layers of traditional blankets, was a small painted shield. The shield was unlike anything Tala had ever seen. About the size of a dinner plate, it was made of what looked like stretched hide, painted with intricate symbols in colors that seemed to shimmer and change in the lamplight. The central design was a spiral surrounded by 4 smaller circles, with lines radiating outward like sunbeams. When Nayeli saw the shield, she nearly dropped the herb bundle she was holding. "That's a medicine shield," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and something that might have been fear. "They were used for protection and healing ceremonies. I haven't seen one in 50 years. "Protection from what?" Tala asked. "From spiritual dangers, from forces that might try to destroy important knowledge or scatter communities." Nayeli studied the shield more closely. "This one is very old, very powerful. Clara must have hidden it here for safekeeping." As if responding to their discovery, the shield began to emit a faint warmth. Tala could feel it even through the layers of blanket that wrapped it. The sensation was comforting rather than frightening, like being near a fireplace on a cold night. But the shield's emergence coincided with an escalation in the community tensions. The next morning brought news that a formal complaint had been filed with the town council about excessive noise and disruption in the Silver Cloud neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson had been joined by several other residents in demanding that the daily gatherings be discontinued. The opposition crystallized around practical concerns that were difficult to dismiss. Property values might be affected by the constant foot traffic. Children were missing homework time to attend the storytelling sessions. The increased activity was creating parking problems and leaving litter in the usually pristine neighborhood. But Tala could sense that the real concerns ran deeper than these practical issues. There was fear underneath the complaints. Fear of being different, fear of standing out, fear of being judged by the broader community for embracing traditions that had been stigmatized for generations. The conflict came to a head during what should have been a routine gathering around the wagon. Floyd Begay was in the middle of teaching a traditional song when a group of community members arrived with official-looking documents. Mrs. Patterson spoke for the group, her voice tight with determination. "We have a court injunction," she announced. "These gatherings constitute a public nuisance and a violation of residential zoning laws. They must stop immediately." The silence that followed was profound. Even the silver bell, which had been chiming softly throughout Floyd's song, fell completely still. Tala felt tears gathering in her eyes as she looked around the circle of faces, some defiant, others resigned, all disappointed. But then something unexpected happened. Ringo, who had been lying peacefully beside the wagon throughout the confrontation, suddenly stood and walked directly to the medicine shield, which Tala had placed on display among the other artifacts. The dog sat down beside the shield and began to howl, not the wild howling of distress, but a deep, melodious sound that seemed almost like singing. As Ringo's voice filled the air, other sounds began to join him. The silver bell started ringing, not with the gentle chimes they were used to, but with deep, resonant tones that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. The painted designs on the wagon began to shimmer more brightly, and the 7 stones around the perimeter seemed to pulse with their own inner light. But most remarkably, people throughout the neighborhood began to respond to the sounds. Windows opened, doors creaked, and residents emerged from their houses as if called by something they couldn't ignore. Even some of the people who had come with the injunction looked confused and conflicted, as if they were remembering something important. They had tried to forget. Floyd Begay stood slowly, his aged face showing a mixture of wonder and recognition. "The shield is calling the community together," he said quietly. "It's reminding us that we have a choice. We can let fear divide us, or we can remember that our strength comes from unity." The medicine shield continued to emanate its gentle warmth, and one by one, people began to sit down in the circle of stones, not just the usual supporters, but some of the objectors as well, drawn by forces they didn't fully understand but couldn't resist. As the sun set over Red Mesa that evening, the largest gathering yet formed around Tala's wagon. The court injunction lay forgotten on the ground, its legal authority somehow insignificant compared to the power of memory and community that the little blue wagon had awakened. But Tala knew this was just the beginning of a larger confrontation. The wagon had revealed its protective shield for a reason, and she had a feeling they would need all the spiritual protection they could gather for the challenges that lay ahead. The morning after the confrontation with the court injunction, Tala woke to find a stranger sitting quietly beside the wagon. At first, she thought it might be another early visitor drawn by the previous evening's remarkable gathering. But as she looked more closely through her bedroom window, she realized this was someone different, someone who seemed to belong with the wagon in a way that even the most devoted supporters did not. The woman appeared to be elderly, though there was something timeless about her bearing that made it difficult to determine her exact age. She wore traditional Apache dress, a long skirt and blouse decorated with intricate beadwork, her silver hair braided with leather cords and adorned with feathers. Most remarkably, she carried an ornate walking stick that seemed to pulse with its own inner light, carved with symbols that matched those on the wagon's wheels. But it was the way she sat that told Tala this was no ordinary visitor. The woman's posture suggested ownership, familiarity, a sense of rightful belonging that made everyone else seem like guests in her presence. When she noticed Tala watching from the window, she raised her walking stick in greeting, and the silver bell on the wagon rang once in welcome. Tala dressed quickly and slipped outside, her bare feet silent on the morning grass. Ringo was already there, lying peacefully beside the woman, as if he had known her all his life. When Tala approached, the stranger looked up with eyes that seemed to hold the accumulated wisdom of generations. "You must be Tala," the woman said, her voice carrying the musical quality of someone accustomed to storytelling. "I am Luna Windkeeper, and I believe you have something that belongs to my family." The words hit Tala like a physical blow. All her joy in the wagon, all her sense of destiny and purpose suddenly felt foolish and presumptuous. "I bought it fairly," she said, her voice smaller than she intended. "Mr. Murphy sold it to me." Luna smiled, but there was sadness in the expression. "Oh, child, I'm not here to take it from you. I'm here because it was always meant to find its way to you. But there are things you need to understand about what you've awakened. As if summoned by Luna's arrival, other family members began to emerge from their house. Nayeli appeared first, moving faster than Tala had seen her move in years. When the elderly woman saw Luna, she stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "Luna?" Nayeli whispered. "But you're supposed to be dead?" Luna finished gently. "Yes, that's what the family was told. It was easier that way. Safer for everyone involved." She gestured toward the wagon with her walking stick. "This wagon belonged to my grandmother, Clara Morning Star. When the persecution of our people grew too intense, when children were being taken away and traditional practices were being criminalized, Clara decided to hide her most precious possessions until a safer time. David and Maria had joined them now, along with several neighbors who had been drawn by the unusual morning gathering. Luna acknowledged each person with a nod, but her attention remained focused on the wagon and its collection of artifacts. "Clara was my grandmother's sister," Nayeli said slowly, as if working through a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. "But that would make you your cousin," Luna confirmed, "though we've been separated by more than just distance." When Clara realized that the government agents were getting closer, she asked me to take the wagon and its contents far away, to keep them safe until our people were ready to remember who they were. Luna stood and walked slowly around the wagon, her walking stick tapping against each of the 7 stones that marked the circle's perimeter. As she moved, the stones began to glow more brightly, and the painted designs on the wagon seemed to respond with their own luminescence. "I've spent 60 years waiting," Luna continued, "living in remote places, keeping the old ways alive in secret, always watching for signs that the time had come to return. When I heard about a young Apache girl who had bought a blue wagon with a silver bell, I knew Clara's plan had finally reached its completion." She stopped in front of Tala and placed a gentle hand on the child's shoulder. "But I had to be sure. You were ready for the responsibility. The wagon isn't just a collection of artifacts. It's a living repository of our people's memory. It chooses its own keeper, and it chose you." "Chose me for what?" Tala asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Luna's walking stick began to emit a soft humming sound, and the symbols carved into its surface seemed to move and shift like living things. "To be a bridge between the old ways and the new world. To help our people remember that they don't have to choose between tradition and progress. They can honor both." As Luna spoke, she touched her walking stick to the wagon's side, and something extraordinary happened. The painted designs began to glow with increasing intensity, and the air around them filled with the sound of distant singing. But more than that, everyone present began to experience shared visions, images of Apache communities from generations past, ceremonies and celebrations, the daily life of a people deeply connected to the land and to each other. Tala saw herself in these visions, but not as she was now. She appeared as a young woman, standing beside the wagon in what looked like a much larger gathering. She was teaching children traditional songs, helping elders share their stories, serving as a translator between the world of memory and the world of today. "These are not just dreams," Luna explained as the visions faded. "They are possibilities, futures, that can become real if you accept your role as the wagon's new keeper." But Luna's arrival had not gone unnoticed by the community members who opposed the wagon's influence. Mrs. Patterson and several others approached the group, their faces showing a mixture of suspicion and concern. "Who is this person?" Mrs. Patterson demanded. "And what right does she have to disrupt our neighborhood with these performances?" Luna turned to face the objectors with calm dignity. "I am Luna Windkeeper, granddaughter of Clara Morning Star, keeper of traditions that are far older than this town or any of its current residents. I have returned to reclaim what was taken from our people, and to ensure that it continues to serve its proper purpose." The confrontation that followed was unlike anything Tala had ever experienced. Luna demonstrated the power of her walking stick, using it to awaken memories in everyone present. Not just pleasant recollections, but the full truth of their community's history. Even the staunchest opponents found themselves remembering family stories they had tried to forget, experiencing a direct connection to ancestors whose wisdom they had dismissed as primitive superstition. As the demonstration reached its peak, Luna made an announcement that shocked everyone, including Tala. "This child," she said, placing her hand on Tala's head, "is my great-grand-niece. Her great-great-grandmother was Clara Morningstar's sister. The wagon didn't find her by accident. It was calling her home." The revelation recontextualized everything that had happened since Tala purchased the wagon. Her unusual dreams, her ability to sing traditional songs she had never learned, her instinctive understanding of the artifact's significance. All of it now made sense as the awakening of inherited gifts rather than supernatural intervention. But with this understanding came a test. Luna explained that accepting the role of wagon keeper required more than just enthusiasm. It demanded genuine commitment to serving the community, even when that service required personal sacrifice. The wagon's power comes from the willingness of its keeper to put the needs of the people above their own desires, Luna said solemnly. Clara understood this, and it shaped every decision she made. "Are you prepared for that level of responsibility, Tala?" As the sun reached its zenith above Red Mesa, casting sharp shadows around the circle of stones, Tala faced the most important choice of her young life. The comfortable world of childhood lay behind her, while ahead stretched a path of service and responsibility that would define not just her own future, but the future of her entire community. The 3 days that followed Luna Windkeeper's revelation transformed Red Mesa in ways that would have seemed impossible just a month before. What had begun as a child's simple restoration project was evolving into something that would test the very foundations of how the community understood itself and its relationship to the past. Luna wasted no time in beginning Tala's education as the wagon's new keeper. Each morning before dawn, she would arrive at the Silver Cloud house, carrying bundles of sacred items and volumes of traditional knowledge that existed nowhere else in written form. The lessons took place beside the wagon, within the circle of 7 stones that had become increasingly luminous as the ceremony date approached. Being a keeper of memories is not about preserving the past like artifacts in a museum, Luna explained during one of these early morning sessions. It's about keeping traditions alive so they can continue to grow and adapt to new circumstances. Tala listened intently as Luna taught her the proper way to care for each item in the wagon's collection. The wooden toys weren't just decorations. They were teaching tools, each one designed to illustrate important principles about community, cooperation, and the interconnectedness of all living things. The blanket fragments contained patterns that served as mnemonic devices, helping storytellers remember complex narratives that might otherwise be lost. But the most challenging aspect of Tala's education involved learning to use Luna's walking stick, which Luna explained was called a memory staff. The ornate carvings covering its surface were not merely decorative, they were a complete record of the community's history, a 3-dimensional book that could be read by touch as well as sight. Each symbol represents a story, a lesson, or an important event, Luna demonstrated, running her fingers over the intricate carvings. When the staff is used properly, it can awaken memories in people who have forgotten their own history, but it requires great responsibility. Memories can be painful as well as beautiful. The most crucial element of Tala's preparation involved learning the songs and chants that would be necessary for the upcoming ceremony. Luna had announced that a community-wide memory restoration ceremony would take place on the night of the full moon, just 1 week away. This ceremony would formally establish Tala as the wagon's keeper and would attempt to heal the divisions that had been growing within the community. But first, Luna needed to retrieve the final element required for the ceremony, a sacred drum that had been hidden even more carefully than the wagon itself. The drum, Luna explained, was not just an instrument, but a heartbeat that could synchronize an entire community's spiritual energy. The search for the sacred sunrise drum became a community effort that brought together people from across Red Mesa's various factions. Even some of the Wagon's opponents found themselves participating, drawn by curiosity or by dreams that had begun visiting them since Luna's arrival. Marcus Stone remembered a story his grandfather had told about a drum buried beneath the old cottonwood tree that grew near the abandoned trading post. Elena Windwalker discovered references in her library books to ceremonies that required the heartbeat of the earth to be successful. Lloyd Begay recalled songs that mentioned drumbeats that could wake the sleeping memories of an entire people. The search took 2 full days and involved carefully excavating areas around several significant locations in town. When they finally found the drum buried beneath the roots of the ancient cottonwood behind the old church, its discovery felt like the culmination of a treasure hunt that had been going on for generations. The sacred sunrise drum was larger than anyone had expected, about 3 feet in diameter, its hide surface painted with symbols that matched those on the wagon and Luna's memory staff. Despite decades underground, it was perfectly preserved. Its wooden frame solid and its drumhead taut enough to produce deep, resonant tones when struck. But the drum's discovery also intensified the opposition to what was happening. A group led by Mrs. Patterson had been meeting regularly at the community center, organizing what they called concerned citizens, who worried about the direction their town was taking. They had enlisted the support of some local business leaders who feared that Red Mesa's growing reputation as a center for Native American spiritual activity might discourage tourism and economic development. The opposition crystallized around a man named Robert Hayes, who owned several properties in town and served on the County Planning Commission. Hayes argued that the activities around the wagon violated multiple municipal codes and that the upcoming ceremony would constitute an illegal public gathering without proper permits. "We're not against Native American culture," Hayes insisted during a heated town hall meeting 3 days before the full moon. "But we have laws and regulations that exist for everyone's safety and protection. These people want special treatment based on their ethnicity, and that's not how democracy works." Luna attended that meeting, accompanied by Tala and several other Wagon supporters. When Hayes finished his speech, Luna stood slowly, her memory staff gleaming in the fluorescent lights of the community center. "Mr. Hayes," she said calmly, "this land where you build your houses and conduct your business meetings was sacred to my people for thousands of years before your ancestors arrived. We are not asking for special treatment. We are simply reclaiming what was never yours to regulate." The confrontation that followed was tense but civil, with Luna demonstrating a diplomatic skill that impressed even some of her opponents. She acknowledged the community's concerns about permits and regulations while explaining that the ceremony they planned predated those laws by centuries and operated under what she called original jurisdiction. But Hayes had allies beyond the local community. Word of the controversy had reached state officials and federal authorities who were concerned about potential conflicts between tribal sovereignty and municipal law. Representatives from various government agencies began making inquiries about the legal status of the activities at the Silver Cloud property. These external pressures created additional stress for Tala's family. David found himself caught between his loyalty to his daughter and his practical concerns about legal consequences. Maria worried that the controversy might affect her job at the clinic or create problems for Tala at school. "Maybe we should slow down," David suggested during one of Luna's morning teaching sessions. "Give people time to get used to the idea before we have this big ceremony." Luna shook her head firmly. "The ceremony cannot be delayed. It must take place on the full moon, or the opportunity will be lost for another year. The wagon has already awakened too many memories. If they are not properly integrated into the community's consciousness, they will create more confusion and conflict. As the ceremony date approached, the divisions within Red Mesa became increasingly apparent. Supporters of the Wagon gathered daily, sharing family artifacts and practicing the songs Luna was teaching them. Opponents organized protests and circulated petitions demanding that the ceremony be stopped. The tension reached a breaking point when someone vandalized the Wagon during the night, spray painting graffiti across its carefully restored sides. And attempting to damage the silver bell, Tala discovered the vandalism the next morning and broke into tears at the sight of the desecrated symbols. But the attack had an unexpected result. When community members saw what had been done to the Wagon, many who had remained neutral in the controversy were moved to take sides. The vandalism was seen as an attack not just on Tala's property, but on the community's cultural heritage and the right of people to explore their own history. A volunteer effort organized by Elena Windwalker managed to clean and restore the Wagon before the ceremony date, but the incident hardened positions on both sides. Hayes and his supporters argued that the vandalism proved how divisive the Wagon's influence had become. Luna and her followers saw it as evidence that some forces were determined to suppress Native American cultural expression regardless of legal protections. The final preparation involved teaching Tala the most complex aspect of her role as keeper, learning to read the emotions and spiritual needs of a large group and to guide the ceremony in ways that would bring healing rather than further division. The ceremony is not about proving who is right or wrong, Luna explained, as they practiced with the sacred sunrise drum. It is about helping people remember that they are part of something larger than their individual fears and prejudices. Ringo had become increasingly protective as the ceremony date approached, rarely leaving Tala's side and showing unusual alertness to any strangers who came near the Wagon. Luna explained that the dog's behavior was normal for spiritual guardians during times of transition and change. On the night before the full moon ceremony, supporters and opponents alike gathered their forces for what everyone recognized would be a decisive confrontation. Hayes had obtained a court order requiring the ceremony to be limited to the Silver Cloud property and prohibiting the use of amplified sound. Luna had prepared contingency plans that would allow the ceremony to proceed regardless of legal challenges. Tala spent that final night in meditation beside the Wagon, surrounded by all the artifacts that had emerged since her original purchase. The painted medicine shield glowed softly in the moonlight, the memory staff hummed with barely contained energy, and the sacred sunrise drum seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. As dawn approached on the day of the ceremony, Tala felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a ceremonial blanket. Everything that had led to this moment, her grandmother's stories, the Wagon's mysterious appearance at Murphy's shop, the dreams that had guided her restoration work, had been preparing her for this test of her commitment to serve her community. The sun rose over Red Mesa on the morning of the full moon ceremony, casting long shadows across a town divided against itself, but united in the recognition that this day would change everything. Whether that change would bring healing or further conflict remained to be seen, but there could be no turning back from the path that had been set in motion by a child's decision to spend her last dollar on a forgotten wagon. The morning of the full moon ceremony dawned clear and still, with the kind of crystalline desert air that seemed to amplify every sound and sharpen every color. Tala woke before sunrise, not because of any alarm, but because the sacred sunrise drum had begun to pulse, with a rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. Luna was already waiting beside the wagon, dressed in her most formal traditional clothing and holding the memory staff with both hands. The 7 stones around the wagon's perimeter had begun to glow with their own inner light, creating a circle of soft illumination that made the entire area feel set apart from the ordinary world. "Are you ready, little keeper?" Luna asked softly. Tala nodded, though her stomach was churning with nervousness. Throughout Red Mesa, she could see people beginning to stir, some preparing to participate in the ceremony, others gathering to oppose it. The division that had been building for weeks was about to come to its inevitable conclusion. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at sunrise, but Hayes and his supporters arrived early with sheriff's deputies and court officials determined to prevent the gathering from taking place. They positioned themselves at the edge of the Silver Cloud property, armed with legal documents and portable barriers designed to control crowd access. "This is an illegal assembly," Hayes announced through a battery-powered megaphone. "Anyone who participates will be subject to arrest for trespassing and disturbing the peace." But as the sun crested the horizon, something remarkable happened. People began arriving from every direction, not just Red Mesa residents, but Apache, people from communities throughout the region who had somehow learned about the ceremony. They came quietly, respectfully, forming lines that stretched for blocks in every direction. Luna lifted the sacred sunrise drum and began to play a rhythm that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. The sound was deep and resonant, carrying farther than should have been physically possible. As the drum beat echoed across the desert, Tala began to sing the calling song that had first come to her in dreams. Her voice, clear and strong despite her nervousness, seemed to awaken something in everyone who heard it. Even some of the sheriff's deputies found themselves swaying slightly to the rhythm, while several of Hayes's supporters looked confused, as if they were remembering something important they had forgotten. The ceremony's power became apparent when the first elder began to respond to Tala's song. Floyd Begay, positioned near the circle of stones, started harmonizing with her voice, adding layers of meaning to the melody that made it richer and more complex. One by one, other voices joined in, creating a sound that seemed to bridge centuries. But the most remarkable moment came when the silver bell on the wagon began to ring in perfect synchronization with the drum and voices. The sound was unlike anything it had produced before, not just clear and musical, but somehow transformative, as if each note was awakening dormant memories in everyone present. Hayes tried to interrupt the ceremony by approaching with his court order, but something strange happened when he entered the circle of glowing stones. Instead of maintaining his opposition, he stopped abruptly, his eyes filling with tears, as memories that had been buried for decades suddenly surfaced. "My grandmother," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the singing. "She used to tell me stories about the old days. I had forgotten." He looked around in confusion, as if seeing the ceremony for the first time. "Why did I forget?" The transformation was spreading through the crowd. Even people who had come to oppose the ceremony found themselves affected by the combined power of the drum, the singing, and the bell. Barriers between supporters and opponents began to dissolve, as shared memories awakened connections that had been severed by years of cultural suppression and assimilation. Luna guided Tala through the first phase of the ceremony, teaching her to use the memory staff to direct the spiritual energy that was building in the crowd. As Tala touched the staff to different artifacts in the wagon, each item began to glow and pulse with its own rhythm, adding to the complexity of the experience. The painted medicine shield responded most dramatically, emanating waves of protective energy that seemed to create a sanctuary around the entire gathering. Within this protected space, people began to share memories and stories that had been hidden for generations, creating connections between families and communities that had been separated by historical trauma. Sheriff's deputies who had come to arrest participants found themselves instead listening to stories about their own ancestors, discovering connections to the Apache community they had never known existed. Court officials who had arrived with legal documents found those papers irrelevant in the face of laws and traditions that predated any written statute. As the sun climbed higher in the desert sky, a single eagle feather drifted down from the cloudless blue above. landing gently on the sacred sunrise drum. Luna smiled as she saw it, recognizing the sign that the ancestors had given their approval to what was taking place. The ceremony was succeeding beyond anyone's expectations, but Tala could sense that this was only the beginning. The real test would come as the morning progressed, and the full power of the awakened memories began to transform not just individuals, but the entire fabric of the community. As the morning sun reached its full power, the ceremony entered its most profound phase. What had begun as a gathering of divided community members had transformed into something that transcended all the boundaries that had previously separated them. The circle of 7 glowing stones had expanded, somehow growing larger without anyone moving them, accommodating the hundreds of people who now surrounded the wagon. Luna passed the memory staff to Tala with ceremonial gravity, her eyes reflecting both pride and relief that this moment had finally arrived. "Now you must complete what Clara began so many years ago," she said softly. "Unite the memories with the living community." Tala accepted the staff with trembling hands, feeling its power flow through her like electricity. The carved symbols seemed to move beneath her fingers, telling stories that she now understood were not just historical accounts, but living pathways between past and present. As she lifted the staff high above her head, the silver bell began to ring with unprecedented intensity. But rather than a single bell, the sound multiplied and harmonized, as if bells throughout the entire region were responding to the call. People later said they heard the ringing as far away as Phoenix, carried on desert winds that seemed to blow in all directions at once. The transformation that followed was complete and undeniable. Hayes, who had arrived that morning as the ceremony's primary opponent, found himself kneeling beside the wagon with tears streaming down his face. "My great-grandmother was Apache," he said in wonder, looking at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "How did I forget something so important about myself?" Mrs. Patterson, who had led the neighborhood complaints about noise and disruption, was sitting cross-legged on the ground, cradling a piece of beadwork that had apparently materialized in her hands. "This was my mother's," she whispered. "She made it when I was a child, but I threw it away when I moved to Red Mesa. I thought it was embarrassing, old-fashioned. How is it here?" The phenomenon spreading through the crowd defied rational explanation. People were remembering not just stories and traditions, but physical connections to their heritage that they had lost or abandoned. Jewelry appeared on necks and wrists. Traditional clothing seemed to manifest over modern dress, and ceremonial items emerged from nowhere to rest in waiting hands. Even Ringo participated in the transformation. The mixed-breed dog had always been special, but now his true nature became apparent. As the ceremony reached its crescendo, his form began to shimmer and shift, revealing him to be what Luna called a spirit guide, a being whose purpose was to help lost souls find their way back to their true identities. The most remarkable change occurred in the 7 stones themselves. As the ceremony progressed, they began to rise from the ground, floating at shoulder height and arranging themselves in a perfect circle that rotated slowly around the wagon. Each stone pulsed with different colored light, creating a mandala of energy that was visible to everyone present. Tala understood that this was the moment of ultimate test and responsibility. Using the memory staff, she began to weave together all the individual awakenings into a unified community experience. She guided the restored memories, helping people integrate their rediscovered heritage with their modern lives, showing them that they didn't need to choose between tradition and progress. The sheriff's deputies, who had come to arrest participants, instead found themselves forming honor guards around the ceremony, their uniforms somehow complemented by traditional accessories that appeared as their own cultural memories awakened. Court officials discovered that their legal documents had transformed into historical treaties and agreements that spoke to the original relationships between peoples rather than modern jurisdictional disputes. As the ceremony neared its completion, Luna made a formal announcement that confirmed what everyone already understood. The wagon has chosen its keeper, and the community has chosen to remember who it truly is. From this day forward, this place will serve as a bridge between worlds, honoring both the ancient ways and the needs of the present. The floating stones descended slowly, settling into their new permanent positions around the wagon. But instead of forming a simple circle, they now created a complex pattern, a medicine wheel that would serve as a gathering place for generations to come. As the formal ceremony concluded and the immediate spiritual intensity began to fade, people found that the changes in their consciousness remained permanent. They retained their recovered memories, their renewed connections to tradition, and most importantly, their understanding that cultural identity was not something to be hidden or abandoned, but celebrated and integrated. The unity that had emerged from the ceremony was not the forced harmony of suppressed differences, but the deeper peace that comes from understanding that diversity strengthens rather than threatens community. Red Mesa had become something new, a place where Apache traditions and modern American life coexisted and enriched each other. But perhaps the most significant transformation was in Tala herself. No longer just a curious 8-year-old girl, she had become what her ancestors would have recognized as a bridge person, someone capable of helping others navigate between different worlds and ways of being. The wagon was now truly hers, not through purchase, but through calling and commitment. 3 months after the ceremony that transformed Red Mesa, Tala sat beneath the cottonwood tree, working on a new addition to the wagon's collection. In her small hands, she carefully stitched beads onto a leather pouch, her first attempt at creating a medicine bag of her own. The pattern she chose combined traditional Apache symbols with designs that represented her own journey, creating something that honored the past while speaking to the present. The wagon had become exactly what Luna and the ancestors had envisioned, a permanent gathering place where the community came together regularly to share stories, celebrate traditions, and navigate the challenges of modern life with ancient wisdom. Every Tuesday evening, people gathered around the 7 stones for what had become known as Story Circle, where elders shared traditional tales and younger community members contributed their own experiences of living between 2 worlds. The changes in Red Mesa had attracted attention far beyond the town's borders. Delegations from Apache communities throughout the Southwest came to see how traditional practices could be integrated into contemporary life without losing their essential meaning. University researchers requested permission to study the community's transformation, though Tala and the Council of Elders who had formed around the wagon were careful to protect the sacred aspects of what had occurred. Most remarkably, the town's economy had begun to flourish in unexpected ways. Rather than driving away tourism, the renewed connection to Apache culture had attracted visitors who were genuinely interested in learning about Native American traditions. A cultural center had been established near the wagon's permanent location, offering educational programs and authentic crafts created by community members who had rediscovered traditional skills. Hayes, whose opposition to the ceremony had dissolved so completely during the ritual, had become one of the project's most effective advocates. His business connections and understanding of municipal regulations helped navigate the legal and practical challenges of establishing Red Mesa as a recognized cultural preservation site. "I spent so many years running away from who I was," he admitted during one evening's story circle. "I thought success meant forgetting my grandmother's stories and focusing only on the future. Now I understand that real progress comes from building on strong foundations, not from rejecting them." Mrs. Patterson had undergone an equally dramatic transformation. The woman who once complained about noise and disruption had become the volunteer coordinator for the Cultural Centre's programs. Her organizational skills, previously focused on maintaining neighborhood conformity, now served to help visitors understand and respect the sacred nature of what they were experiencing. Elena Windwalker had expanded her role at the library to include a special collection of Apache history and culture, working with tribal elders to ensure that written records accurately reflected oral traditions. She had also begun learning traditional weaving techniques from patterns preserved in the Wagon's blanket fragments. Marcus Stone had established a woodworking school where he taught both traditional carving methods and contemporary applications. Young people learned to create functional items that incorporated ancestral designs, bridging the gap between art and utility that characterized the best Apache craftsmanship. But the most significant change was in the children. Tala's classmates, who had initially been curious about the Wagon as a novelty, had become genuinely interested in their own family histories. Students began bringing traditional items to show and tell, sharing stories their grandparents had told them, and asking questions about their cultural heritage that previous generations had been afraid to voice. The school district, initially resistant to what they saw as a distraction from standardized curricula, had eventually recognized the educational value of the cultural awakening. They established a special program that integrated traditional Apache knowledge with conventional subjects, showing students how indigenous understanding of astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, and medicine contributed to human knowledge. Luna had remained in Red Mesa, taking up residence in a small house near the cultural center where she served as an elder advisor to the community council. She continued to work with Tala, teaching her the deeper mysteries of serving as a keeper of memories, but she also emphasized the importance of allowing the tradition to evolve and adapt to contemporary needs. The Wagon chose you not because you would preserve everything exactly as it was, Luna explained during one of their morning sessions, but because you would help it continue growing and changing in ways that serve the living community. Ringo, whose true nature as a spirit guide had been revealed during the ceremony, remained Tala's constant companion. Though he appeared to most people as an ordinary dog, those with spiritual sensitivity could see his luminous nature and understood his role as protector and guide for both the Wagon and its keeper. The medicine pouch Tala was creating represented a full acceptance of the responsibilities that had chosen her. Unlike the traditional pouches that held herbs and sacred items, hers was designed to contain memories, not physical objects, but the stories and wisdom that she was learning to carry for her community. As she worked, children from the neighborhood began to gather around her, drawn by the same inexplicable attraction that had originally led her to the Wagon. She found herself naturally falling into the role of teacher and storyteller, sharing what she had learned in ways that each child could understand and appreciate. The sun was setting over Red Mesa as Tala completed the final stitches on her medicine pouch. The painted designs on the Wagon glowed softly in the evening light, and the silver bell chimed gently in the desert breeze. Around the circle of 7 stones, families were beginning to gather for the weekly story circle, continuing a tradition that was both ancient and newly born. Looking at her completed work, Tala realized that she had created more than a medicine pouch. She had crafted a symbol of hope for future generations. Just as the Wagon had carried memories and traditions forward through time, her pouch would help ensure that the revival they had experienced in Red Mesa would continue to grow and spread. As night fell and the first stories began around the Wagon, Tala understood that her journey was far from over. Somewhere else, another forgotten treasure was waiting for a curious child to discover it. Another community was ready to remember who they truly were. The work of bridging worlds and healing cultural wounds would continue for as long as people like her were willing to listen for the call of memory and answer with courage and love.